Good morning. Warm welcome to everybody, distinguished guests, respected faculty members, students, esteemed members of Symbiosis family. I am Dr. Amey Khare, and it is my privilege to welcome you all to the Vishwaban Auditorium for the 12th Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture organized by Symbiosis School of Economics. We gather today for a significant occasion in our academic calendar, an event that honors intellectual legacy of Professor Suresh Tendulkar, whose seminal contribution to development economics and poverty estimations continue to shape policy discourse in India. This memorial lecture is not merely a ceremonial, it is an intellectual commitment. Every year, we assemble to engage with pressing economic questions of our time in spirit that reflects Professor Tendulkar's analytical rigor, methodological precision, and unwavering public commitment. On behalf of Symbiosis School of Economics, I extend my warm and respectful welcome to our Honorable Chancellor, sir, to our chief guest, Professor Deepak Nayyar, sir, for the highly respected scientist we have today, Dr. Mashelkar, sir. We have eminent economist, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, sir. For the members of the leadership, faculty colleagues, researcher, and students. Light is a symbol of knowledge, guiding us from ignorance to wisdom. To officially inaugurate today's session, I request our esteemed dignitaries to kindly step forward and light the ceremonial lamp. Our Honorable Chancellor, Sir, Dr. H.B. Muzumdar, Sir, our esteemed chief guest for today, Professor Deepak Nayyar, Sir, Director of Symbiosis School of Economics, Jyoti Chandiramani, Ma'am, our PIC members, Niharika, Ma'am, and Ishita Ghosh, Ma'am.
या ब्रह्माच्युतशङ्करप्रभृतिभिः देवैः सदा वन्दिता.
So before moving forward, we would like to take a brief moment to reflect on this legacy of Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture. We have made a video capturing the essence of eminent stalwarts and who graced this series. So I request everybody to direct their attention for the screens.
Rooted in the timeless philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world as one family. Symbiosis International, deemed university, was founded in 1971 by Professor Dr. S.P. Mujumdar with a vision that education must build international understanding. Today, with students from over 85 countries and a NAACA++ accreditation, Symbiosis stands as a global academic community defined by excellence, inclusivity, and purpose. At the heart of its intellectual tradition lies the Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture, an annual platform dedicated to dialogue on poverty, inequality, governance, and development. Instituted in memory of Dr. Suresh T. Tendulkar, former chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, a scholar known for integrity, empirical rigor, and transformative contributions to poverty estimation. Over the years, this lecture has hosted some of the most distinguished voices in economics, building a legacy of thoughtful inquiry and national relevance. And now, on February 23rd, 2026, we proudly present the 12th Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture. We invite you to join us as we continue this legacy of ideas, dialogue, and responsibility. Thank you.
To deliver the welcome address, I invite the Director of Symbiosis School of Economics and Dean Faculty Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Jyoti Chandiramani, ma'am.
Honorable Chancellor, Sir, Dr. Mazumdar, Sir. Our esteemed chief guest for today, Professor Deepak Nayyar. Respected members of Professor Tendulkar family, Mrs. Sunetra Tendulkar ji, Sai and Jui, their daughter. distinguished guests, fellow directors, colleagues, and my dear students, a warm good morning to one and all. On behalf of each one of us here present today, I also welcome Professor Deepak Nayyar today on this very momentous and auspicious occasion. It is both a privilege and a profound responsibility for us to welcome you to the 12th late Professor Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture. This annual lecture is not merely a date on our academic calendar. It is a moment of institutional introspection, a reaffirmation of our commitment to scholarship that serves society, to evidence that informs policy, and to intellectual inquiry anchored in official clarity. Today, we are doubly, triply honored. We have a house full of students. Thank you, students. We also have a house full of dignitaries. We have amidst us the presence of two of India's most distinguished public intellectuals, Mashelkar sir and Kelkar sir. I think SSE is proud today that you're here amidst us. We would have loved to have you someday individually, but today is like a triple bonanza for us. Thank you for coming here today. Their scholarship, public service, and institutional building have shaped India's scientific and economic imagination for decades. Their presence lends this occasion not only stature, but inspiration in many ways. They represent the very generation of scholar statements to which Professor Tendulkar belongs. Allow me to share a personal reflection into the genesis of this particular lecture. In 2010, my first responsibility was to start a master's program. At that time, I heard that Professor Tendulkar had moved to Pune. I learned that he lived just down the road from our campus, very close to the school, Symbiosis School. In our foundational years at that point, when we launched the master's program, we thought that when we inaugurate it, we will have Professor Tendulkar there for the inaugural, as well as be a mentor to the school, allowing us to move forward under his guideship. However, in early June 2011, we learned that he was hospitalized, and on the 21st of June that year, 2011, Professor Tendulkar unfortunately passed away. So our dreams of having him as a mentor did not get realized. But I think there's a karmic connect because he's been with us since 2014. And every year, whenever I reach out to somebody to invite them for the Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture, I think it happens with such ease. That was the kind of personality that he had. In May 2014, I had the privilege of reaching out to his family, and so the genesis of this lecture, they gave us the kind consent. Professor Tendulkar was among India's most respected public economists, a scholar who combined analytic rigor with moral seriousness. Educated at the Delhi School of Economics and later at Harvard University, he could easily have confined himself to academic abstraction. However, he chose engagement, and with whom? With students, with institution, with policy, and with the real development challenge confronting India. For decades, he shaped generations at the Delhi School of Economics. His classroom was known for intellectual discipline and clarity of thought. And believe it or not, this is not something I don't know about this, but this is what his students have shared with me. Whether it's Dev Kusum Das, whether it's Mahendra Dev Ji, whether it's Subir Gokarn, who had come for the first one. Subir was so excited that he was going to give this particular lecture. Beyond academia, he served with distinction in public life as chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, as a member of the National Statistical Commission, and on the Central Board of the Reserve Bank of India. His chairmanship of the expert group on poverty estimation in 2005 culminated in the Tendulkar Committee report in 2009, which redefined how India understood and measured poverty. That's the same time around which globally the multidimensional poverty analysis was being undertaken and poverty was getting redefined, and it's been evolutionary since then. He exemplified the finest tradition of the public intellectual, rigorous yet accessible, critical yet constructive, principled and pragmatic. He believed that economics must ultimately serve society, that data must throw light on injustice, and that policy must be grounded in evidence. These are probably the principles that we follow also at the School of Economics. It is perhaps for these reasons that over the last 12 years, we've been able to have a very good series of Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lectures. This morning, we are privileged with Professor Deepak Nayyar going to deliver a lecture on the end of a world order under stress, from Pax Americana to Pax Mysteriana. Every day we wonder what's new. What's the new tantrum? What's the new signal that is coming? And there's a mystery that we are trying to resolve, unresolve, learn to live with. We live, unfortunately, even in a more VUCA world than when the word was discovered in 1980s. An era marked by volatility, strategic rivalry, technological acceleration, algorithm-driven systems that shape markets, politics, and public discourse. The established hegemonies today appear uncertain. Multilateral institutions are under strain. Economic interdependencies coexist with fragmentation. In such a context, we are compelled to pose some important questions. I think they are the questions that lie in each one's mind here today. Has the development agenda, the sustainable development goals, human development, inequality, climate action been pushed to the margins? These are things that we keep talking about. Will short term security imperatives crowd out long term commitments to equity and sustainability? Will development become increasingly fragmented or and nationally defined rather than globally coordinated? Or is it precisely a moment of uncertainty that the idea of development becomes even more urgent? At the Symbiosis School of Economics, we remain deeply committed to asking these questions through research, teaching, and dialogue. For us, development is not a slogan, it is an absolute responsibility. So, friends, as we gather this morning, we do in the spirit of Professor Tendulkar, as he embodied. May this memorial lecture continue to honor his legacy by fostering ideas that are empirically grounded, socially conscious, and policy relevant. Once again, a warm good morning. Thank you.
Now we have the honor of listening to our visionary founder of the Symbiosis movement, our Honorable Chancellor, Dr. Professor H.B. Muzumdar sir. Dr. Muzumdar sir's journey is not merely a story building an institution, it is a storytelling of building an idea. Long before Symbiosis became a globally recognized education system, Dr. Muzumdar sir was distinguished academician, professor and head of the Department of Botany at Ferguson College, Pune. A dedicated scholar and a teacher of botany, he shaped generations of students through his commitment to scholarship and discipline. However, his life took a transformative turn in 1971, deeply moved by the isolation and challenges faced by the international students in Pune.
Distinguished Chief Guest, Professor Deepak Nayyar, Director of the School of Economics, Dr. Jyoti Janjiramani, Professor R.A. Mashilkar, whom I regard as wisest person in Pune, wisest. अरे clap करो. Dr. Vijay Kelkar, faculty, and my dear students. Suresh Tendulkar, let me do a formality. I offer my tributes to Suresh Tendulkar. In Symbiosis University, we celebrate those who have contributed to different subjects. We celebrate V.M. Dandekar Memorial Lecture Series. We also decided to celebrate or dedicate this particular lecture to the memory of Suresh Tendulkar. I feel that Pune is a city of economists. I remember Dhananjay Kelkar, Dhananjay Gadgil. Before him, there was Gopal Krishna Gokhale, then V.M. Dandekar, Vijay Kelkar, who is sitting here. And so many. Suresh Tendulkar was one of them. I knew his family, his brother, daughter, and some of his grandchildren studied in Symbiosis schools. Be that as it may, there are different ways to perpetuate the memory of your loved ones. Some create statues, some give names to the roads, some display their portraits. But the best and most intellectual way to celebrate the memory of a person whom you regard as with regard and respect is to organize memorial lectures. In Pune International, we celebrate in memory of Dilip Padgaonkar similar memorial lecture. Memorial lectures are not merely an academic exercise, but to remember the work and contribution of the person, spend moments, take pause, what he had done, what he wanted to do, and how can you continue the legacy of that person. Suresh Tendulkar, no doubt, was a great economist, primarily based on poverty management, development, etc. Now, how can we take forward his thoughts, what he has contributed, what he has written? And therefore, to me, such lectures are the best way to perpetuate the memory of your loved ones. Well, I do not know anything about economics, but I always enjoy the person's lectures, the way he speaks, the way he discusses it. And I'm glad that Professor Nayyar is with us. Few months ago, we organized a conference at Lowry, our Symbiosis International University campus, when almost all important economists, scientists, and bureaucrats had assembled. It was a 3-day conference. And what I found was the entire conference was dedicated to the honor of Professor Nayyar. Am I right? And as we were sipping tea, somebody told me that he was the youngest vice chancellor of Delhi University. He was also advisor to the government of India. Be that as it may, but he is a gentleman, a kind human being, deeply interested in globalization and its impact on the world, especially on India. And today he is going to speak on a very interesting topic. And the topic is the end of a world order under stress, from Pax Americana to Pax Mysteriana. Well, my dear students, please listen to this lecture very carefully, because this topic itself is in a way related to India. What happened was, after World War II, in 1945, there was a power shift. Before Second World War, we used to call Pax Britannica. Britain ruled over the world. As they used to say, and British Empire's sun doesn't set. Why? Because it was a superpower, supreme power. And it's a supreme power because of its strong economy, military power, international dominance. But in World War I, after Second World War, slowly but progressively, the influence of Britain as a superpower started declining. And after Second World War, America became Pax Americana in all manners. So much so that started controlling and dominating the whole world. Military might, take any field, and America used to dominate. Education, science, technology, economy, GDP, per capita income, military might, weapons. And out of this super might arose arrogance. And we see that arrogance in President Trump. To him, tariff became a weapon, world weapon. But one incident happened, and it was in Afghanistan. Suddenly, America, which ruled Afghanistan for nearly 20 years, suddenly they withdrew. And that was a tactical defeat for America. And slowly, but definitely, it is on the decline. Who will replace America? And that is why Professor Nayyar says Mysteriana, Pax Mysteriana. Mysteriana means uncertainty. You do not know what will happen, what will emerge, who will replace America. And therefore he says it is still a mystery. But Professor Nayyar, to me, it is not a mystery. Few days ago, I had read a book called Thunder from the East, written by two journalists of New York Times. I do not know whether their prediction is right or wrong. But he says that power shifts will be there, and ultimately the center of power, like Sudarshan, will slowly come to the east. And there are two candidates. One is China, second is India. And the authors say that it is unlikely to settle in China, howsoever militarily he may be superior to India. But China has many drawbacks. One is almost a dictatorship. No democracy, no independent judiciary, no freedom of speech. And Pax doesn't survive in such atmosphere. Whereas in India, you will find, in spite of our many problems, India has democracy, India has independent judiciary. Today there might be many problems, but I think the present government headed by Narendra Modi is going to make India to be reckoned with. Recently, AI summit was held, and we were stunned by its very size, decor, stature, and the scholars and heads of states who visited that summit. But more than that, I remember one prediction by Swami Vivekananda. In 1893, he predicted that 20th century may belong to West, but 21st century will belong to India. And believe me, Swami Vivekananda's prediction has not gone wrong. It was in 1897 that he predicted that India will get freedom exactly in 50 years. And that time even the First World War was not started. But his prediction came true. Exactly after 50 years, in 1947, he got freedom. So, if Vivekananda's prediction is coming true, the way in which our Prime Minister and others are taking India forward, and along with government, perhaps I will give more credit to the private sector. Private sector is emerging. AI. So you know AI, we have started AI at undergraduate level. Artificial intelligence course for BSc and for BBA. Why? Because I feel that everyone should understand AI. Every student should understand AI, irrespective of his subject in which he is specialized. So, in all sectors, India is slowly progressing. And coupled with its democracy and independent judiciary and freedom of speech, who knows? Mysteriana will not be a mystery, but let us pray that India will take or replace Pax Americana. With these few words, thank you so much for listening to my speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this insightful talk. Now, I guess we have more, vision to listen to the sir's lecture with this kind of knowledge. Uh, we are now arrive at the central moment of today's gathering. Uh, it is my distinct privilege to introduce our chief guest for the 12th Suresh Tendulkar, Professor Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture, a scholar of exceptional distinction, Professor Deepak Nayyar, sir. Professor, most of the introduction has been already covered by, Muzumdar sir when he was talking about him, but, it is important to talk about, so that's why. Professor Deepak Nayyar is one of the India's most eminent development economists whose career has combined academic scholarship with public engagement at the highest levels. A Rhodes Scholar, he earned a DPhil in economics from the University of Oxford. He is currently Emeritus Professor of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and an honorary fellow at Balliol College, Oxford. Over the course of his academic career, he has taught at leading institutions including the University of Oxford, the University of Sussex, the Indian Institute of Management Calcutta, and the Jawaharlal Nehru University, shaping generation of students and scholars. His academic leadership was most prominently reflected during his tenure as a Vice Chancellor of University of Delhi, where he played a significant role in strengthening the university's academic and institutional framework. In public service, Professor Nayyar served as a chief economic advisor to the government of India and later as a secretary in Ministry of Finance during a critical period of India's economic transition. In these roles, he contributed directly to the macroeconomic policy formulation at the pivotal moment in the country's development trajectory. His international engagement are equally distinguished. He has served as a chairman of Board of Governance of UNU World Institute for Development Economic Research in Helsinki and as a president of International Economic Association. A prolific and influential author, his major works including Catch Up, Developing Countries in the World Economy, and Resurgent Asia have significantly shaped contemporary thinking on industrialization, globalization, and the political economy of development. It is therefore most fitting that Professor Deepak Nayyar sir delivers his memorial lecture in the honor of Professor Suresh Tendulkar sir, a scholar who likewise combined intellectual rigor and public purpose. Sir, we are deeply honored in your presence. May I request Dr. Muzumdar sir to felicitate Dr. Professor Nayyar sir. So before the lecture, I know we are waiting for the lecture, but just before that, I want to ask Sai madam and the Tendulkar madam to share their thoughts on this lecture series. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay. You can hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Professor Muzumdar, for being here in person and sharing your wisdom. That was really nice to hear. Thanks to Dr. Jyoti Chandaramani, for Director of SSE, for continuing this legacy of my father, Dr. Suresh Tendulkar, forward. It's great to hear so many lectures which have happened, and it's very meaningful for us that you continue his legacy and we remember him via these lecture series. I also wanted to extend my sincere appreciation to Professor Deepak Nayyar for graciously accepting and agreeing to deliver the 12th lecture in this series. It is very relevant. The end of the world order under stress, from Pax Americana to Pax Mysteriana. We are all eagerly awaiting to hear what he has compiled in this lecture. So on behalf of my family, really wanted to thank you for this meaningful tribute. Thanks again, and I'll hand it back to you to hear the lecture.
I humbly request Dr. Nayyar sir for the delivery of the lecture. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Majumdar, Professor Chandiramani, the Tendulkar family, colleagues, and my dear students. I consider it a privilege to be in your midst this morning to deliver the Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture. I follow in the footsteps of many distinguished predecessors. I can only hope that I live up to the high standards set by them. You know, I'm particularly pleased that Dr. Ramesh Mashalkar and Dr. Vijay Kelkar are here this morning. We go back a long time together, more than 4 decades. I knew Suresh Tendulkar even before I met Ramesh and Vijay. We first met in 1977 when I was teaching in England, and at the invitation of Professor B.S. Minhas and T.N. Srinivasan, I came to the Indian Statistical Institute as a visiting professor. And that is where I first met Suresh. And as it happened, I was Vice Chancellor, University of Delhi, when he retired, having served a professional lifetime at the Delhi School of Economics. Suresh was a meticulous scholar and a remarkable teacher. Suresh was able to combine the analytical rigor of an academic with the rough and tumble of public policy. Suresh was confident, yet unassuming. Suresh was gentle, yet firm. And above all, I think he was a wonderful human being. Now, you know, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. We all know that the world order has come to an end, an abrupt end. But where do we go from here? Now, you know, my Latin is not very good. Even so, I know that the Latin word for mystery is mysterium, not Mysteriana. Yet, I chose the subtitle because it has a nice rhythm, a nice alliteration, and it is comprehensible to all. Let me begin with citing Antonio Gramsci, who was a Marxist philosopher of Albanian and Italian origins, who served in the Senate in Italy, but was imprisoned by Mussolini in 1926, and he died in prison in 1937. And he wrote in his prison diaries, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." I will return to the relevance of this sentence a little bit later. Now, let me begin with a preface that is a historical perspective on the world order. I might be one of the few economists who believes that history matters. There is always the past in our present, but there is just as much a future in our past. Okay? Now, the existing world order at any juncture in time reflects the balance of economic and political power. It can change over time as an outcome of decisive shifts in this balance. But history reveals that such changes are few. This is because the evolution of a world order is a slow process that may span a century or even longer, so that the transition from one to the next can stretch over decades. For this reason, a longer term historical perspective is essential. Uh, the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century was a turning point for the world. It was the beginning of the end of Asia's overwhelming significance in the world, and it was the beginning of the rise of Europe, in particular Great Britain, to dominance in the world. For almost 150 years, as the proverb goes, the sun never set on the British Empire, although some skeptics sometimes jocularly said that is because God does not trust the British in the dark. And it was in this age of colonialism and imperialism, British economic primacy was the implicit world order, manifest in state power and naval power, which provided protection for its economic and political interests in distant lands, as well as its merchant ships in distant waters. The early 20th century was the next turning point. It was the beginning of the end of Britain's dominance as the United States overtook Britain in per capita income in 1914. And it was the beginning of the rise of the United States to dominance in the world. This process, let me say, spanned half a century. During the transition from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana, which was complete by 1950, the League of Nations, established in 1920 after World War I, as an intergovernmental organization to promote international cooperation and maintain international peace, was a miserable failure. At the end of World War II, which brought destruction and chaos across the globe, the United States sought to construct a world order that was largely in place by the late 1940s. It was based on international institutions, rules, and practices in a quest for a broadly free international markets, essentially underwritten by American economic strength and military power. This world order, which spans 75 years, was not without its limitations and flaws, yet it managed to preserve the peace between superpowers in the Cold War era and broadly in the world as a whole during the 1990s and 2000s, although it struggled to cope thereafter. There were, of course, geographically bound conflicts in which many of which big nations lost small wars. It was also conducive to decades of rapid economic growth, unprecedented in human history, in the era of beginning with the post war economic reconstruction, gathering momentum in the era of markets and globalization during the 1980s, which improved living standards for ordinary people in the industrial north and lifted billions out of poverty in the global south, although it was associated with a rapid, almost exponential increase in economic inequalities between countries as well as people. This world order was under increasing stress, beginning with the global financial crisis in late 2008 and the Great Recession that followed in its aftermath. Financial crises dented faith in markets. Mounting economic inequalities created social and political discontents among people. We are the 99%, for example. International institutions creaked at the seams. The IMF and the World Bank failed to reinvent themselves for changed times. The WTO, alas, came to a dead end. The United Nations system, which had lost its way much earlier, was neither credible nor effective, even if the world sorely needed such an institution for its designated critical roles. Globalization was at risk. Economies were going through difficult times, spilling over into crises, with growth slowdowns, double digit inflation, and persistent unemployment. Politics within countries became contentious, if not polarized. The geopolitical divides were visible and sharper than they had been for decades. International relations were strained, and there were several flashpoints. This period also witnessed a discernible change in the balance of global economic power, which exacerbated the stress. The past decade was indeed a most difficult economic and political conjuncture for the world. For a world order already under stress, much worse was yet to come. Donald Trump assumed office as President of the United States in January 2025. The 1 year since then has turned out to be a watershed movement. The world order that was created by the United States circa 1945, embedded in international rules, institutions, norms, and practices underwritten by American power, has been dismantled by the decisions of and actions of President Trump in 2025 in just 12 months. The unilateral tariffs, which differentiated between countries and buried a comatose WTO, were a death blow to the multilateral trading system, replacing it with a transactional unilateralism that borders on a mercantilism, which we saw some centuries ago. Restrictions on international movements of services, technology, and finance have mounted across countries. The irony is that the United States, that championed globalization, has brought it to an abrupt end. In the political sphere, an important United Nations is not relevant anymore, as its peacekeeping role, whether Ukraine or the Gaza Strip, has been assumed by President Trump. Security alliances such as NATO have been reshaped into transactional relationships. The sovereignty of nations, whether Greenland, Nigeria, Palestine, or Venezuela, is no longer sacrosanct. It would seem that we have returned to a world where might is right. Geopolitics is also characterized by a transactional approach to international relations, often reflected in bilateral and plurilateral bargaining. The world order that we knew has indeed come to an end. Now, the object of my lecture is to analyze the world order that was put in place after the end of World War II, sketch the broad pictures of its evolution, highlight its multiple quiet crises 75 years later, and above all, to discuss possible future scenarios in the context of the world economic disorder that has surfaced in 2025. Now, let me spend a few minutes on what is very important for our understanding the balance of economic power in the world. There is no measure, no obvious measure of how economic power is distributed between countries in the world. Even if imperfect, perhaps the best index is their share in world GDP. I do it at market prices and current exchange rates, which highlight changes over time. Now, what I've done is that I calculated the share of three major country groups, 7 geographical regions, and 12 selected large countries in world GDP at current prices and market exchange rates during the period from 1970 to 2024, which is the latest for which we have national account statistics. Now, this statistical evidence spanning more than half a century reflects clear shifts in the balance of economic power. Now, they have 3 dimensions, groups, regions, and countries. The changes in the share of 3 major country groups, once described as the East, West, and South in world GDP, reveal 3 clear trends. First, the share of the former USSR and Eastern Europe dropped sharply from 15% in 1970 to 5% in 1990 and 2% in 2000, but stabilized at about 4% thereafter. Second, the share of industrialized countries, broadly the West, was in the range of 68% until 1980, more than 2/3, rose steadily to a range of 75-80% until 2005, but then dropped sharply to 60% in 2015, after which it did diminish but has recovered to 61% in 2024. The West still matters. Third, the share of developing countries remained in the range of 17 to 20%, 1/6 to 1/5, until 2000. But it climbed steadily thereafter and rapidly during 2015 to reach 39% in 2024. Statistical evidence on the distribution of world GDP by geographical regions. Yes, thank you. North America, Europe, and I aggregate West, North, and South Europe, Eastern Europe, and former USSR, industrialized Asia, which is largely Japan and South Korea, but also includes Israel, developing Asia, the rest of Asia, Latin America, and Africa, it tells a similar story. The share of North America and Europe in world GDP was about 60% until 2005, diminished to 50% in 2010, and was 49% in 2024. The share of industrialized Asia rose from 6% in 1970 to 18% in 1995, but fell back to less than 6% in 2024. The story of the former USSR and Eastern Europe, as I said, is dismal. The share of Latin America and the Caribbean in world GDP was 5 to 6% throughout. The share of Africa dropped from its peak level of 5% in 1980 to 2.5% in 2024. So Africa regressed. The share of developing Asia increased steadily from 8% in 1970 to 14% in 2025, after which it rose rapidly to reach 30% in 2024, which is the highlight of the story. Now, if you look at the share of 12 selected large countries, the USA, Germany, UK, France, Japan, Russia, South Korea, China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, and Mexico, in world GDP, it provides a more disaggregated, even if a less complete picture. It shows, and please note this, it is important, that the share of the United States in world GDP has been in the range of 25 to 30% since 1945 until now. And it was almost 27% in 2024. The story of Japan is a sharp contrast. As its share rose from 6% in 1970 to 18% in 1995, but dropped sharply to 3.5% in 2024. The share of UK and France increased steadily from 1970 as they reconstructed after the war, and reached 5% each of world GDP during the period 1990 to 2005, but diminished thereafter to 3% by 2024, 3% each. While that of unified Germany, and that decline is stunning, dropped from 8% in 1990-1995 to around 5% in 2000-2010, and it was just 4% in 2024. The share of Brazil and Mexico remained mostly in the range of 1-2% throughout. The share of Russia was also 1-2% throughout. The share of South Korea rose from less than 0.5% to 1.7% and stabilized in 2000 and stabilized thereafter. The share of Indonesia rose from 0.3 to 1.2% from between 1970 and 2020. No change thereafter. The share of India was 1-2% until 2005, but increased slowly to 3.5% into 2024. So we have a long way to go. The stunning rise of China is striking. In 1990, the share of China in world GDP was about the same as that of India and Brazil. But it increased steadily to 5% in 2005 and rose rapidly thereafter to reach 16.5% in 2024. In sum, and I think it's important for you to see the big picture, the period 1970 to 2024, a little more than half a century, witnessed profound changes in the global economic balance of power, a rapid economic decline of the East, the former USSR and Eastern Europe, the rise and fall of Japan, an economic recovery in Western Europe until 2005, followed by a significant decline that gathered momentum in 2010, continued economic dominance of the West until 2000, and the steady rise of Asia, including the stunning rise of China since 2000, the significance of the United States, reflected in its share of world GDP, is the only reality that has not changed in the past 75 years. Now, let me turn to the multiple crises that this order experienced. You know, and this is the economist in me, the raison d'etre of any world order is simple. National laws would suffice if economic space coincides broadly with geographical space. However, in the contemporary world, economic space extends much beyond geographical or political space. Moreover, conflicts or wars between countries arise from the pursuit of perceived national interests by governments, and there are wars. But countries are not subject to international laws because there is no world government or parliament that can enact laws binding on nations. Obviously, creating rules or laws that are binding on sovereign nation states, which imply ceding national sovereignty in some respects, is difficult. Why? Because it's subject to mutual acceptance. Yet, a world order as a broadly acceptable framework is both necessary and desirable to preserve global public goods, such as peace, the environment, or human health, and to regulate global public bads, such as wars, environmental degradation, or pandemics. Now, in recent times, the recent existing world order has simply been unable to perform such a role. Now, first, if you look at wars, the war between Russia and Ukraine, the war between Israel and Palestine, may have come to an end buried under some sand by Donald Trump. But this peace, there is no peace in Europe yet, but this peace in the Middle East is also fragile. Now, such wars or conflicts might be localized, but if they continue or others elsewhere proliferate, and by the way, there are so many conflicts across the world at this moment. Some are international, some are domestic, between states and their people. Some are civil wars. They are bound to have a global impact. Alas, there is no credible or effective institutional mechanism in the world order that can help restore peace or stop war. Environmental degradation and climate change stare us in the face. There are more frequent occurrences across the world of forest fires, floods, droughts, excess rainfall, rising sea levels, receding glaciers, temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius in southern United States, in Western Europe, in northern China, or wet bulb temperatures, and we are getting close to it in Delhi, at which human beings cannot survive, and so on. Humankind, it seems to me, is mortgaging its future. In every sphere, the poor and the marginalized are most vulnerable, but the rich are not immune. Yet, effective progress is much too slow. The scrutiny of actions and pledges made in the 2005 Paris Agreement at successive COP meetings since then is ineffective. Countries wax eloquent in comfort because these are not binding obligations and they are to be met sometime in the distant future. And now, the United States, led by Donald Trump, has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. Now, no agreement on climate action has any future if the United States is not part of it. Now, third, the global coronavirus pandemic turned the world upside down for 2 years, imposing an enormous burden on economies and people everywhere. The total number of deaths in the world associated with COVID-19 is estimated at 7 million plus. It was simply not recognized that problems without passports need solutions without passports. Instead, at the time when international cooperation and collective action was an imperative, the response of governments was driven by perceived national interest. erecting national barriers to international travel, despite the knowledge that microbes, germs, and viruses will inevitably cross borders, or accumulating vaccines when so many people in other countries remain unvaccinated. The most effective response would have been international cooperation instead of a myopic pursuit of illusory national interests. Now, at this juncture, it seems to me that the willingness and the ability of governments to coordinate in terms of implementing the much needed collective action to preserve global public goods and regulate global public bads is simply not there. The erstwhile world order was neither effective nor credible. Yet, the combination of market failure in the sphere of economics and government failure in the realm of politics made it exceedingly difficult to reform, let alone reconstruct this order. Now, the present world order will inevitably only make things worse. Alas, the reluctance of governments to explore the possibilities of international collective action has been exacerbated by a widespread resurgence of nationalisms. In the West, national conservative political parties are in office as governments or as part of coalition governments or as close contestants for political power in elections to come. Similarly, in a significant number of countries in the global South, populist authoritarian political parties or leaders, often elected through the democratic process, articulate their strong belief in nationalism. Inevitably, such political ideologies stress their perception of national interests, often associated with militarism. In doing so, and it's not unintended, they erode the autonomy of institutions and the freedoms of citizens. It is no surprise that such governments shun the idea of international cooperation, for it is perceived as ceding space in terms of national sovereignty. Okay, now I come to the question I ask. The present world order is confronted with the fundamental problem that the balance of economic power is now very different from what it was in 1945. The rise of developing Asia, concentrated in China, which gathered momentum after 1990, has slowly chipped away at the economic dominance and the political hegemony of the United States and Western Europe. The story, let me stress, is about more than China. In 2024, the share of China in world GDP was 16%, but the share of the rest of developing Asia was 14%. The share of industrialized Asia, essentially Japan and South Korea, was another 6%. Thus, in 2024, the share of Asia in world GDP was as much as 36%, of which China is just 16%. Now, the geopolitics of the world has also changed profoundly because of unexpected developments. The United States has abandoned the idea of multilateralism and dismantled the world economic and political order it created after World War II. Donald Trump has a clear, revealed preference for bilateralism, which is consistent with his transactional approach to international relations, both in economics and political spheres. In stressing America's hegemonic role in the Western Hemisphere, in effect, he is relinquishing its leadership role in the world. The decline of Western Europe in a relative rather than absolute sense, and in the UK it's absolute, is discernible. The rise of Asia in both relative and absolute terms is obvious, but the globalization of Islam is at the same time seeking to challenge Western hegemony. Of course, by far the most significant change is the rise of China with its aspiration for a superpower status with the United States, at par with the United States. Now, at this juncture, it is plausible to suggest that the 21st century, in its third decade, could be a turning point for the world order, similar to those in the late 18th and early 20th centuries, which could be the beginning of the end of the dominance of the United States in the world. But this would be, let me be honest, mere speculation. But there is one important lesson that emerges from history. Dominant powers are reluctant to cede economic or political space to economic uh, to newcomers that are rising powers. History reveals that the emergence of new centers of production in economics and new centers of powers in politics does erode hegemonic dominance, but changing realities often remain unrecognized, if not ignored. Thus, processes of change in the world order are always slow. What is more, this is a complex phenomenon which unravels and unfolds over a long period of time. Both the duration and the outcome of this process are unpredictable. And anyone who tells you that they know is bluffing. No one knows. This could last. In my view, the present conjuncture is an interregnum. Okay? Now, the word interregnum has Latin origins, combining inter, between, and regnum, reigns. Okay? The literal meaning is between reigns. Yeah? In ancient Rome, it referred to the period between one king and the next when the Senate nominated a person for an interim period. Now, the metaphorical meaning also includes longer periods between eras. And that's the relevance of the Antonio Gramsci quotation I began with. It was a period between 1918 and 1939 was a long interregnum. Now, and I will return to that. Now, we must recognize that the resurgence of Asia, except for China, is not large enough to sift the hegemonic balance. The United States remains the dominant economic, political, and military power in the world. And even if it no longer seeks a proactive role in preserving or creating a world order, because its domestic political constituencies are not supportive of the idea, there is no other country yet, may I say, not even China, that could replace the United States in this hegemonic role, which has at least three dimensions. Economic, it is the only country that has a national currency which is the equivalent of international money. Political, influence that is based on its economic strength and military power. And technological, even if China is catching up. Given the complex reality and its inherent uncertainties, anyone who attempts to make a prediction, as I said, is either guessing or bluffing. I actually believe that we are at the early stages of an interregnum and a transition. We can only speculate about alternative future scenarios of the world order that might emerge, say by 1950, a quarter century from now. Now, I'm going to pose these alternatives in the form of 4 questions and give you my answers. But my answers can't be definitive. We could have many plausible answers. First, are we witnessing the beginnings of a transformative change in the world order over the next 25 years? Second, are we at the cusp of an emerging bipolar world yet again, as it was in the Cold War era, with the United States and China as the 2 superpowers? Yeah. Third, are we moving towards a multipolar world in which the United States and China may be the lead players, but there will be another 8 to 10 countries that are also key players? Fourth, are we going to live with the fluid situation where the world order remains in transition for some time to come? I will endeavor to provide my answers to each of these questions in turn. This is bound to be speculative, yet thinking ahead about possible futures is a part of the way forward. Now, the transformative change. You've all heard the phrase Asian century. No? There are observers who believe that we are witnessing the beginnings of a transformative change in the world order over the next 25 years. Dr. Majumdar referred to Swami Vivekananda and the rise of the East. The recent rise of Asia and the emergence of its powerhouse economies, among which China is the most visible, has led to an idea or a hope voiced by some that the 21st century could turn out to be the Asian century. Now, the parallels drawn sometime are with Great Britain in the 19th century and the United States in the 20th century, when the dominance of these countries was reflected in politics, economics, and even culture. There can be little doubt that circa 2050, a century after the end of colonial rule, Asia will account for at least 2/5, if not one half, of world income and will be home to about 3/5 of the people on Earth. I wrote this in 2013 in my book, Catch Up, and I think it will be the case. It will have not only an economic significance, which was a reality in 1820, China and India accounted for half of world GDP, but also a political significance in the world that would have been difficult to imagine in 1970. In terms of income per capita, however, it will be nowhere near as rich as the United States or Western Europe. Thus, Asian countries such as China, India, and Indonesia will emerge as world powers, but without the income levels of the rich countries. China will inevitably be large and influential. So might India. I'm not as confident as Dr. Majumdar. It depends on how we organize our society, economy, polity. And so might Indonesia, but without the income levels of rich countries. But even as a continent, and my answer to this question is a crystal clear no. Asia will not have the dominance that Great Britain did in the past, or the United States has even now, straddling the economic sphere and the political realm, which stretching beyond those to culture. Soft power. Moreover, there is a fundamental flaw in this comparison. Please remember that Great Britain and the United States were states that were hegemons. Asia is a continent in geographical space. It is made up of 48 countries with a total population of 4.8 billion that stretches across a vast geographical space from East Asia through Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia. Given this heterogeneity, juxtaposed with the conflicts and contradictions within Asia, it is difficult, I think for me, impossible to imagine a Pax Asiana or a Pax Sinica. It's just as difficult to imagine. In my view, therefore, the idea of an Asian century is hyperbole rather than a plausible prospect. Okay. Let me turn to the second question. Bipolar world, the idea that we are at the cusp of an emerging bipolar world yet again, as it was in the Cold War era with the United States and China as the two superpower rivals this time around, competing for their respective spheres in the world, is more plausible but requires serious thinking. Given the time constraint, I can only provide my intuitive assessment of this hypothesis based on plausible reasons. You have a right to disagree. Now, at the outset, it must be recognized that for the USSR, superpower rivalry with the United States was political and political alone. It was driven by ideology and reinforced by military power on both sides, with no parity in income levels. The Soviet Union per capita income was less than 1/6 of US per capita income then, as China's is less than 1/6 of US per capita income now. Now, in that sense, China is similar. However, there is a fundamental difference in the economic dimensions of the relationship. There was almost no economic engagement between the United States and the erstwhile USSR. In sharp contrast, the Chinese economy is interlocked with the US economy through international trade, investment, and finance. So it's going to be very difficult for them to extricate themselves from each other. Now, the notion of a bipolar world is based on projections of GDP, which are linear extrapolations based on assumptions. Jim O'Neill at Goldman Sachs started this, but OECD, a number of others do it. And it's interesting that when it started with Goldman Sachs, China was going to overtake the US in GDP in 2025. That became 2030. That became 2035. That became 2045. Now, the latest projections show 2055. And I don't believe that is likely. Now, the real world is not simply about the arithmetic of compound growth rates. That, if per capita income grows at 10% per annum, per capita income will double in 7 years. Or if per capita income grows at 7% per annum, it will double in 10 years. Yeah. Now, the critical determinants of growth underlying such projections are what happens to population, what happens to productivity, and what happens to the exchange rate. Okay? For China, its surplus of labor is exhausted. Its workforce has peaked. Okay? So that economic growth will now depend essentially on productivity increase, which most analysts believe will be at most 3% per annum. Okay? If that is lower, growth will slow further. Similarly, any fall in fertility rates. In China, that's already visible. It's visible in India, in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala, Telangana. If fertility rates decline, it'll have a further effect that will dampen growth. Just as important, such projections of GDP are very sensitive to assumptions, particularly about prices and the exchange rate. And if the appreciation of the Chinese yuan is less than expected, the date for catching up to the US GDP will be deferred further in time. Beyond economics, the most important underlying assumption is that the political system in China will sustain and continue. There are many, President Xi Jinping runs a tight ship, but there are many lumberings, many tumbles. You look at the recent purge of the army, People's Army. Now, in scum, I'm skeptical about the notion of a bipolar world in 2050. Now, by the way, Donald Trump is peddling that idea. Donald Trump's idea of G2, US and China, each with their respective spheres of influence, West and East, I think is a flight of fancy. Such spheres of influence were possible in 1945 because the US and the USSR were victors in World War II. Great Britain was drained, if not exhausted, while Europe had been devastated by the war. Thus, Western Europe and Eastern Europe became their respective spheres of influence. Most countries in Africa at that time were de facto or de jure European colonies. Now, the present world is vastly different. The US and China do account for 43% of world GDP, but Europe, West, North, and South accounts for 20% of world GDP. The European Union, they are not identical, they intersect, overlap. EU accounts for 17.5%. Asia, excluding China, but including in Japan and Korea, accounts for 20% of world GDP. The share of Latin America and Africa in world GDP is much smaller. Yet, please recognize that these two continents have as many as 87 independent countries, which would seek to strike a balance to bargain with the US and China in pursuit of their national interests rather than be carved out into one sphere of influence. And I'm happy to answer questions on that. I can give you an example from the present day. Now, the geopolitics of the contemporary world is also very diverse and very complex. Western Europe and Japan are in decline. Russia aspires for a seat at the high table. Developing Asia is also on the rise, but most countries in Asia have concern about China's quest for dominance in the continent of Asia. Africa's present economic significance may be low, but please remember the continent has an enormous potential embedded in the demographic reality that it is the only continent where population growth will continue to the second half of the 21st century. Even India's population will stop growing 2055, 2060. Now, third, the multipolar world. I think the more likely scenario in 2050 is a multipolar world in which dominance will not be that striking. The United States and China will most probably be the leading countries with an economic and political significance in the world, no doubt. But it is likely that the group will be larger. Among the industrialized high-income countries, it will, even with the Britain in decline, include Germany, France from Europe, Italy perhaps, and Japan from Asia, which taken together today account for 1/6 of world GDP. It will almost certainly include India and Indonesia from developing Asia, just as it will include Brazil and Mexico from Latin America. Beyond these 10 countries, there may be other countries in the group, including Russia, its military, if not economic strength, and perhaps one or two others, hard to predict. In such a multipolar world, the distribution of economic and political power will be less unequal than at present, but large asymmetries will still remain. Now, of course, the mere existence of such a multipolar world by itself cannot create a new world order. That would require cohesion and cooperation among the two biggest players, together with a smaller subset of, say, 10 major countries. But it will also have to be based on consultations with a much larger number of countries to evolve a framework for a world order that is mutually acceptable. Okay? Now, this might be feasible if there is a shift in the balance of economic power in the world such that 10 countries, these 10 countries taken together, are larger than one of the two big countries and close to the other in economic size. So these 10 have to become larger than China and close to the US in their share of world GDP. Now, if this does happen, it could create a genuinely multipolar world. Yeah? It would also reduce, even though it cannot eliminate, the present democratic deficit in the world order. Okay? So I think this is the most likely prospect. But let me conclude. Okay? I've told you a story that spans a long period of time, that spans a vast geographical space. Pax Americana has come to an end. Yet the United States retains the essential attributes of a hegemon: an economic size, technological cutting edge, military strength, political influence, soft power, and a national currency that is the equivalent of international money. By the way, the Europeans thought euro would become an international currency. But mercantilist Germany just built up large current account surpluses. China hopes to make the yuan an international currency. But their current account surplus has touched 1.5 trillion this year, in 2025. They are mercantilists too. You know, you can provide your national currency can become international money if and only if you run current account deficits, which the United States has been willing and able to do for a long period of time. Now, anyway, the construction of a new world order, I think we have to recognize, will be far more difficult than it was after World War II. The reason is obvious. There has been a profound change in the global economic distribution of economic power over the past 75 years. I sort of set that out. In 1950, the United States was the dominant economic and political power. The past 2 decades, since the early 2000s, have witnessed an erosion in its economic dominance and political hegemony, although its share of world GDP has remained steady. Hence, at this juncture, no single country, even China, will not have the dominance to create a new world order as the United States did circa 1950. Building a consensus to address cross-national and cross-domain challenges is increasingly difficult. So apparent from the slow progress in climate change negotiations, let alone efforts at preserving peace in the world. Aging populations, food shortages, water scarcities, recurring pandemics are new challenges that confront the world. Their economic consequences might actually end up reinforcing nationalisms, xenophobic attitudes, even militarism. The possible impact of profound technological changes, artificial intelligence on the horizon, only adds to the complexity and the uncertainty. Is AI a force for the good or not? It could also compound inequalities. It could slow down the evolution of the human mind. Many things are possible. Now, clearly, the emergence of another hegemon in the world that could replace the United States is not a plausible idea at this juncture. A quarter century from now, a more multipolar world is possible, perhaps even probable, as an outcome. However, the ability of a dozen countries in this multipolar world to cooperate with each other, as to consult with a wider range of smaller countries to construct a new world order, is a far more distant prospect. Therefore, in my view, the default option is a prolonged interregnum in which the world order remains in a state of flux. This fluid situation, I believe, is most likely to continue until 2050, if not longer. And there might be surprises in store for us that are very difficult to predict, or not impossible to predict. Now, let me return to history. I began with history, and I will conclude. There was a similar prolonged interregnum in the transition from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana, half a century, between the end of the two world wars, which stretched for more than 40 years. Yeah? In fact, the present world disorder reveals many strong parallels with the world that existed a century earlier. The preceding era of globalization, 1870 to 1914, which Eric Hobsbawm described as the age of empire, Great Britain, Grand Britain, Little England now, which seemed unstoppable at that time, was brought to an abrupt end by World War I. Just as our recent era of globalization, 1980 to 2024, has been brought to an abrupt end by Donald Trump. The almost identical duration, 45 years, of each of these phases of globalization is pure coincidence. What brought them about was not World War I or Donald Trump. What brought them about was the economic, social, and political consequences of globalization. And globalization ultimately, not just in the 19th and the 21st centuries, has brought itself to an end. It has happened at least 3 times earlier in history. Now, let me compare that where we are now, where we were in the interwar period, 1918 to 1939. In 1918, when the war ended, soldiers returning home from Europe transformed the Spanish flu into a worldwide pandemic. 50 million people died, 12 million in India, not independent at that time. Even as the United States entered the roaring 1920s, Europe struggled with problems of reconstruction, slow growth, and hyperinflation. Economic inequalities between and within countries rose sharply. This was conducive to the rise of nationalism and militarism. Mussolini captured power in Italy, subverting democracy and transforming his dictatorship into fascism. Unequal terms in the Treaty of Versailles required Germany to pay financial reparations, disarm, lose territory, give up all its colonies. This peace, enforced by war, did have its economic and political consequences. Now, in October 29, the great crash in the stock markets of the United States led into the Great Depression. It was not long before it spread worldwide and persisted through the 1930s. Economic troubles led to political instability in many parts of the world. The political churn spurned nationalism and militarism in many countries. By the 1930s, the Nazis were the second largest political party in Germany. In 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed chancellor. By 1934, he was chancellor, president, and fascist dictator. The Great Depression also led to a rise of militarism in Japan during the 1930s. Economic nationalism surged almost everywhere in the current world as countries adopted beggar thy neighbor policies, restricting imports to protect domestic output and employment. It hasn't got as bad now, but it's on the way. Now, both Germany and Japan, that were rising powers, that were latecomers to industrialization and empire, aspired to a larger role in a world dominated by Great Britain and the United States, even if it was in transition from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana. In this quest, during the late 1930s, Germany pushed Europe closer to war, which was declared in September 1939. Japan did so in December 1941 when it attacked the United States in Pearl Harbor and the British Empire in Asia. Now, there are striking similarities between this past and our present. The financial crisis of 2008 spread worldwide through contagion. The Great Recession followed in its aftermath. The slowdown in growth unleashed protectionisms, disrupting the smooth scale of globalization. Inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth between people and countries, also between rich and poor people in the world, increased rapidly. Slow growth, persistent inflation, and high youth employment have exacerbated discontents among people everywhere. The coronavirus, of course, disrupted international global production networks. Large international firms relocated or dispensed with offshore production as an insurance against shortages or disruption, reinventing their business models. Governments worried about national security, strategic autonomy, sought to reduce dependence on the outside world. And this has got exacerbated with the ascent of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has unleashed protectionisms everywhere. The politics of nationalisms is resurgent across the world. Militarisms are on the rise. Economics is political. Both are being weaponized by the strong against the weak, by the rich against the poor. Now, given the present world economic and political disorder, the weak are simply vulnerable and helpless. And might, it would seem, is right. History does not repeat itself, but as Mark Twain once said, it does often rhyme, and it would be wise to learn from history. Historical experience suggests that crises or wars that lead to decisive shifts are catalysts of change. This was so in 1945. Economic and political realities have changed since then. I think the world should not have to wait for another crisis of such proportions or for a war to act. The erstwhile world order created by the United States has collapsed. There are no rules and no norms for nations in the present economic and political disorder. The symptoms are worrisome. No one knows what will happen tomorrow. I'm amazed that financial markets are still stable. And there are alarm bells. Now, I can only hope. I think the reality will turn out to be what I have sort of sketched. Yeah? I could well be wrong, but the probability is high. I can only hope that enlightened central interest and wise political leadership of major countries will provide the impetus for international cooperation and collective action. Alas, I don't see it on the horizon at the moment. With these words, let me stop and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, sir, for this thought-provoking session. We would like to take question and answers from the audience.
So we are open to the question session right now. Let's go with this first student on the left who's put up his hand. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. This is a really wonderful session. I am Adhiraj More from FY MSc. My question is, if the New World Order is somewhere in the East, or as you said, it's a multipolar world, will it run on the machine of capitalism or neocolonialism, or will we see a change in the system as a whole?
Question one, question two. We go to a lady. Let's be gender neutral. Okay. Since, yes, if there is one, please stand up. Thank you. Be crisp with your question. Thank you.
Thank you for the recognition, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. I'm Rishika. I'm from MSc as well. My question is, you reflected on the xenophobic and racist trends in the world right now. What I wanted to ask was, if we're looking at a multipolar world where India also wants to contribute and wants to become a part of the multipolar world, so what is the path for India ahead, considering the same xenophobic reactions and reflect in the Indian society today as well? Thank you.
Okay. Faculty, any faculty member? Yes, Sabyasachi.
Hello, sir. This is Dr. Tripathi speaking. So my point here is that you see the global order that UK become the global order highest positions by looting other countries. So the point is that the global order now, US also is dominating and looting other countries also, many ways. So the point is that that global order depends on the economic progress or the looting other countries of the world? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Let me turn to the first question at the beginning about how the future might unfold. Yeah? Um, would it be capitalism's good, bad, or ugly? Or would it be some other form of government? Would it be returns to forms of imperialism? Um, Now, my answer, and that is my view, I may turn out to be wrong, my answer is the following. First, as John Kenneth Galbraith said many, many years ago, that, capitalism has many flaws and warts, and I use the word good, bad, and the ugly, okay? Um, Yet, capitalism is the only system that has a capacity to correct. Yeah? And that's why capitalism survives. Yeah? It's much like democracy. It has flaws, warts, it works slowly, but it's the only thing that has some semblance of checks and balances, some self-correcting mechanisms, some, some aspects that protect the rights and freedoms of citizens. So I think the future is going to be a mix of market economies and political democracy. The latter is now at risk because there is a growing disillusionment among people, uh, sort of battered by the consequences of markets and globalization, that they have little faith left in mainstream political parties that converge to the middle. And everyone sang paeans for markets and globalization. And you've got the rise of these populist authoritarian leaders elected by people, but they subvert the very democracy that elects them. Yeah? So my own answer is yes, capitalism will survive its crisis because it will adapt. Uh, my own answer is that it is going to be, yes, there are economic inequalities between countries and between people. Those who are stronger exploit the weak, those who are richer exploit the poor. That will continue in some ways, but I think it's the democratic politics that can challenge it. At the moment, we are in a quagmire because research in the social sciences suggests that the biggest supporters of authoritarian regimes are people who are less than 40 years old, the youth. The biggest supporters of sort of social democratic regimes are people over 50 or 60. Yeah? So the young want authoritarian regimes. So in a sense, the future will depend on you, how you shape and reshape democracy. But my answer is clear. You will have some combination of market economy and political democracy. Market economies will continue, political democracy, I think it will survive. It is really the only way forward for societies to live harmoniously. Um, Now, you know, the second question, I think xenophobia, nationalisms, militarisms are probably the biggest dangers in our contemporary world. Yeah? Because they are what will lead to conflicts within countries and wars between countries. And that is my fear. I think it will be possible as a default option for a multipolar world to emerge. You know, and the fact, what I'm saying today is that, some rules, unfair rules are clearly worse than fair rules. But we never had a fair world order. It was an unequal world. But no rules is worse than unfair rules. Yeah, because then is the arbitrary power of the strong, the rich. So I'm hoping for a multipolar world which will reduce asymmetries, which will reduce democratic deficits, and ultimately self-interest would lead to some, if not rules and institutions, norms and practices developing for international cooperation. Because as I said, economic space does not coincide with geographical space or political space. And that's not going to change. But xenophobia, to me, and chauvinism represents the biggest danger to the future of the world. What I sketched about the parallels between now and the mid-1920s, early 1930s, a century earlier, that is what is worrisome. Um, Now, okay, your question about looting. Yeah, you see, in a sense, you know, at one point I believed in equality, in socialism, but we have discovered that it is a utopian idea. Yeah, if you look at the real world, China and India, communist, capitalist, are probably the two most unequal societies in the world, other than the United States and the United Kingdom. They are much more unequal than Brazil, much more unequal than Malaysia. So it's not as if, you know, capitalism breeds inequality and socialism dampens it. No, it's unbridled capitalism too in communist China. So inequalities are natural, but someone like me, that's a personal belief system. It's a belief system, it's a moral kind of axiom that, you know, it is what you have to moderate is extreme inequalities in income and wealth. Yeah? Uh, you know, social stratification, economic stratification is almost inevitable in human society. If it were not there, people would invent ways to draw lines between groups. Yeah? It exists everywhere. It's race, it's caste, it's religion, all kinds of divides. But I hope that we are able to construct a kind of an egalitarian society in which everybody has rights and freedoms as a citizen, and everybody has equal economic and social opportunities. But, you know, even for Mao, attainment of you know, the transition from socialism to communism never took place anywhere, from each according to his work and each according to his need, to each according to his need. So we will have to accept that. But what we have to watch out for is mitigating extreme inequalities in income and wealth, finding ways of moderating those, finding means of getting rid of social stratification that is based on race, caste, gender. You know, those are the biggest dangers to what are humane societies. I think we now live in a world where economic progress is part of everybody's quest for prosperity. So economic progress will be there, but will we return to forms of imperialism? I don't know the answer. An unequal work creates those possibilities. I think at the moment, China, if you talk to most countries in Southeast Asia, is seen as a threat, is perceived as a threat. Whether it turns out to be, we don't know. But in an unequal world, whether it is within countries or across countries, there will always be some forms of inequality will spill over into exploitation of some kind or the other. But I don't think that looting of the kind that took place in the colonial era is now possible. Yeah? I think it will be very difficult for anyone to sustain now. Unequal terms of exchange? Yes. Unequal distribution of gains? Yes.
So we are really headed to number, 1 o'clock. And the questions that did get raised over here, and with the audience definitely being under 40, we would definitely want to know sometime at some poll whether you are up for authoritarianism and rather than democracy. That's something that we would like to know. The nation wants to know. And I liked what you said, sir. Equality and socialism are probably utopian concepts and how we've evolved over the years. But I think what we look at is a more egalitarian or a system where livability becomes, easy for almost every household or every citizen. With that, I'll let you take over for the day. This side, another day you'll have questions, okay?
Thank you so much, ma'am. So, as we So as we come to the end of this 12th STML lecture series, I would like to invite Dr. Shuchi Mishra ma'am for the vote of thanks.
Respected Chief Guest, Professor Deepak Nayyar, Honorable President and Founder of Symbiosis, Dr. S.B. Mujumdar, Mrs. Tendulkar and Sai Sapre joining us online, Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani, colleagues, students, and esteemed guests. As we come to the close of 12th Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture, it is my honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks. At the outset, I extend a sincere gratitude to our chief guest, Professor Deepak Nayyar. Sir, your distinguished scholarship and profound contributions to development economics and international political economy have shaped the academic discourse in India and beyond. Your lecture today was both intellectually rigorous and deeply reflective, as it has given much to think about. We are truly grateful for your time and for honoring this occasion with your presence. Thank you, sir. Our founder president, Dr. S.B. Mazumdar, sir, had to leave for some other commitments, but we are always deeply honored by his gracious presence. I extend a heartfelt note of respect and gratitude to Mrs. Tendulkar and Ms. Sai Sapre for joining us online. Your presence adds profound meaning to this occasion. The memorial lecture is not merely an academic event, but it is a tribute to the intellectual legacy of Professor Suresh Tendulkar. We are grateful for your continued support and blessings. Our heartfelt thanks to our director, Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani, whose vision and dedicated efforts in curating and organizing this lecture annually ensures that the legacy of Professor Suresh Tendulkar continues to be honored with dignity and academic excellence. Behind every event lies a team working with dedication and commitment. My sincere thanks to our faculty, our staff, IT team, student volunteers, and the Vishwa Bhavan team for their efforts in making today's event a success. To our students, your participation reflects in the spirit of inquiry that Professor Tendulkar himself embodied. Hoping that today's lecture will inspire you to engage critically and think independently. Finally, I thank all our guests and participants, both present here and online, for being a part of this meaningful academic tribute. With this, I once again thank everyone for being here for the 12th Suresh Tendulkar Memorial Lecture. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
You've been brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay? Thank you.
So as we come to the end of this event, I request everyone to stand up for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे